something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit, then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
A big warm welcome to our listeners again. Thank you for joining us. I'm Georgia Ellis, and I'm here to take you down another rabbit hole, and we're going to tumble together and learn more information from another amazing guest. And I really can't wait to get curious with today's guest. We have Doug Wilson. So a little bit about Doug. At the age of 31, Doug was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain tumour. After undergoing a 14-hour operation and suffering extensive cranial nerve damage, he battled surgically induced meningitis, had to learn to walk again, and faces lifelong complications, including single-sided deafness, permanent balance issues, and facial paralysis. The story of how he overcame these challenges using diet, Kundalini yoga, and meditation is truly remarkable. Just over 12 months after his surgery, Doug set a Guinness World Record by becoming the first person to run 7 competitive marathons on 7 continents in under 7 days. I need to read that again, I think. So 7 competitive marathons across 7 continents in under 7 days. He has since gone on to run at elite level and now teaches how yoga and meditation play a key part in self-transformation and optimizing human potential. Let's get curious. Welcome, Doug.
Hi, thanks for having me.
That's an awesome bio, and I'm sure there's more to you than just that short little bio. I'm sure there's way more to you than those experiences. So let's kick off with a question that I ask all of my guests, and this will help us get a real sense of who you are. And my question today is, I want you to imagine that I am a 7-year-old Alice, wandering through beautiful Wonderland, and I bump into Doug. And I look at you and I say, what are you doing in Wonderland? Why are you here? What's your purpose? How would you answer that question of your purpose and why you're here to a 7-year-old girl?
Try and keep it simple and say that we're both on the journey to looking for the same thing within ourselves, which I believe is understanding the truth of who we are and how we relate to ourselves and the environments around us. I think it's a really easy thing to overlook in such a busy world. So yeah, saying to a younger person would definitely be just spend time understanding the depths of who you are.
Yeah, I love that you say that, spending time at understanding the depths, because I don't think we can ever fully get there, to be honest.
Well, maybe not in one lifetime.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things in your bio that got me really curious, and that was how you have used a number of different modalities to help you overcome your challenges. So diet, Kundalini yoga, and I think meditation was the other one. So I'm really curious around how that happened, how you came across those modalities as potential answers and ways to heal and overcome those challenges. So what was the story behind that?
So the trigger for it was getting sick, because prior to having my brain tumor, I was working that fast-paced corporate lifestyle in London and New York. I was working in the investment banking industry as an enterprise IT architect. So I was a million miles away from those kind of things like yoga and meditation. There were things that I'd heard those words before, but I had absolutely no idea what those things were. And I just thought they're not things that I do. So they weren't on my radar. And I had a really interesting journey to having that come across my path. And it was triggered by my illness, because I ended up having a 14-hour brain operation, ended up in intensive care, went through that process of what people talk about when they have near-death experiences, seeing tunnels and flash of light and all of that sort of stuff. And I just came out very changed, and it's quite a long story, but I basically tried to rush myself back to the life that I knew, which meant that getting out of hospital, learning to walk again, and getting back over to London and New York as soon as I can. I kind of came to the realization that I got back there and hadn't really learnt the lesson that I needed to learn, so to speak, and kind of sat back at my desk one Monday morning in London and said to myself, I really don't know what I'm doing. You know, I don't know why I went through all of that pain and suffering just to end up back in the same place that I started. I wasn't necessarily sure I wanted to be there to begin with. So I was left sort of going, I need help. But it was the first time that I'd ever said to the universe, or how you want to phrase it, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. I actually need a little bit of guidance, a little bit of help. But not that I necessarily said those words. It was more of a feeling that I finally came to that realization. And when I did, the way that my life changed in a really short period of time is actually mind-blowing. About 3 or 4 days later, I met a guy who was an energy healer. And I didn't even know that that stuff existed. And the next thing I know, I'm laying on his table in a small London clinic, and he's doing this, energy healing. And I'm sitting there the first few minutes, like laying up at the roof. He's got his hands on the back of my head. I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? What is this? This is just madness. And then bang, all of a sudden, somehow he got me into this incredible state, and I had an amazing experience through that healing. It was a 90-minute healing. I thought it was 10 minutes, and I came out, and the stuff that I experienced during that was very profound. And I came out of that wide-eyed, feeling energetic, feeling clarity. And that was just the start of it. That was the start of knowing that there was something more to me than what I'd ever experienced before. And when I left his clinical office, he said, just don't go back and just get into your normal day. He goes, pay attention to your mind, pay attention to your thoughts. And nobody had ever said that to me. Such a simple little thing, like pay attention to what your thoughts are. And I was like, what? And that was it. I kind of went back to the office. I couldn't log in. I sat back, and what he'd said to me kept rattling around, and I just sat back and I started observing rather than just being like stuck in the monotony of life and just going through the processes. And that was the catalyst for me to start just exploring a whole different realm of human existence. And that's like, I came from a scientific background working in computer sciences, obsessed with physics, quantum mechanics, astronomy, and all of that sort of stuff from a young age. And I just all of a sudden started redirecting that kind of energy and studying and things into what would be deemed the spiritual aspects of life. And it was like I flicked a switch, and about, I don't know, it was a really weird period of time. I can't put an exact time frame to it, but a few weeks later, I was sitting on an island in Greece, a private island. I'd ended up thinking, I came across yoga through this kind of studying spirituality. And next thing I know, I'm sitting on this island in Greece, private island. There was only about 4 other people on the island, and 2 of them were yoga teachers. And all of a sudden, I'm learning the practices of Kundalini yoga, and meditation is integrated heavily into that practice. And I spent a week there, and again, that week changed me quite profoundly. And I came back, quit my job, bought a yoga mat, and took up a practice that still to this day I've been very devoted to, and have only grown with the practice. And in terms of what it's been able to do for me as a human being is immeasurable. I couldn't really put words to it. It's more in what I share of my experiences. And I think it is, like we were saying at the start, it's an ongoing practice. I'm always getting to points where I just learn that there's so much more to understand. And this is coming from, I've not been a person that got into yoga and meditation from a perspective of going to classes and studios. This was me. At one point, I was doing 10 hours a day of self-practice just on my own, on a mat in my house. And I've got a lot of experience, but I still understand there's so much more to go.
Yeah. I'm really curious to take a wide angle view of your experience, because I know with the listeners that I have, a lot of them actually are in that, I'm going to use words that they probably don't want to hear, the corporate rat race. I tend to call them corporate captives. So what I'd love to do is understand what your life was like before being diagnosed with the brain tumor. So what was life like? Because as you said, you were just, it wasn't until you had this session with an energy healer that you actually realized that you can notice what you're thinking. What were you doing up until that point? What was life like before that?
From a fund, just touching on that point, I was just living with less state of awareness. That's what I put it down with. And I'm not by any means was my life bad. I had a great life. I mean, I was living in London, New York, traveling the world, running marathons in crazy places like Antarctica, like across frozen lakes in Siberia. I was just going around. I was partying a lot, so I was very into the kind of corporate function scene and like long weekend benders, using lots of drugs and alcohol from a young age. But that's something I did all my life, and it was definitely heightened when I was in London and working in that industry because it was so normalized. Working 10 to 12-hour days, probably drinking 4 or 5 nights a week and taking drugs as well. Working on very intense projects, big deployment projects, data center rebuilds, and huge, like lots of things, lots of money involved in it. Living life a million miles an hour, burning the candle at both ends with blow torches, and it was a blur. But I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy it. I did a lot of great things, but I always had the underlying feeling of what's it all about. But again, it's not like I would sit there and ask myself. That was just something that was always felt not quite right, but I could never articulate that. Whether you take all the drugs and all of that into it, like that's all going to play a part in that feeling of not right. But at a very fundamental level, there's always that part of my being that would be like, surely there's got to be more to my existence than this. Because I'd have that realization, hey, I'm really successful. I'm doing all these great things, and something doesn't quite feel right. But until I had the experience of being able to step back and look more subjectively back onto that, I could have stayed in that pattern all of my life until the day that I died, and it wouldn't have been a problem. It just meant that I wouldn't have learned those things I needed to learn about myself. And it's interesting how life works. You can never see. That's the thing. Like, I'm looking back at it now with hindsight, and it always makes it so much easier. But I had to do so much work on myself to understand who I was and understand who I am and understand where I'm going, rather than just going through life not understanding and not even knowing that I'm not understanding. I know that might sound a bit paradoxical, but it's kind of how it is. You kind of know, but you don't know. So you just get on with what you do know.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I was in. It was very much, if I look back at my, say, 10 years when I was kind of living over, at times that just feels like it was one long day, because it was so similar. Mm-hmm. Even though I was doing all these cool little things, they were all very much related to the same sort of process and the same, it was just kind of like this linear trajectory that I was on. And again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. Lots of people live their life that way and have really great lives. It's just that when you get the opportunity to step back and see a little bit more depth to existence, it's a really good opportunity to take, because you can not only learn so much about yourself through developing that understanding, you can then go on and actually make a huge difference in other people's lives. And I think there's a lot of value to that.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times here how you started to understand who you are and learn more about yourself. So, $1 million question, what have you learned about you?
I've learned there's definitely more to myself than what I once thought, in terms of a depth of understanding of, and I tread lightly when I use words like this, but our soul or our spiritual essence, because especially in the context of talking to people that are coming from the corporate space or whatever, as soon as you use words like that, you can instantly alienate people. So I try to actually steer clear of words like that. But I definitely learnt that, and I got that from my experience of being in an intensive care bed in hospital. instantly knew that there was something more, but it took a long time to understand what that was. And I think that the best way for me to summarize is that before I had that understanding, I lived life in a reckless way. I had that attitude of, well, I'm going to die anyway. I don't care. The world's falling apart anyway. Everything's broken. So I'm just going to live the way I want and not really care. So that meant that that attitude that I had within myself spilled onto other people. Because if that's the way I felt about myself, how could I treat other people any differently? But again, when I was doing that, of course, I never thought I was in the wrong. So it was like learning things about that. Oh, shit, these are the reasons why I feel sadness, or these are the reasons why I feel pain. Oh, maybe other people have that experience too. Oh, okay, this makes more sense to me now. And that's an experience that I've only been able to learn. I could never read that in a book. I could never, have somebody specifically tell me that. I had to learn all that stuff myself, and I got that. I learned so much about myself just by sitting in self-observation. We call this meditation, but just by sitting down, understanding things. And the more I understood about myself, the more I understood about the world around me and other people. And it just makes life seem so much more pleasant or digestible. I don't know, it's hard to find words for it, but I went from being, to honor life.
Yeah.
Rather than being someone that's like reckless, I don't care, I'm going to do all these drugs, I'm going to burn myself out and run myself into the ground, and I don't care about death. I had that macho ego mentality of, oh, I don't care, I know what I'm doing. And then when I actually stared it in the face, it was like, oh, no, I have no idea. And, oh, now I see the value and the preciousness of life. And not from a sense of now I'm scared to die. No, now I'm want to live and value life, not just within myself, but within everything around me. That was probably the biggest fundamental shift, to go from being somebody that was almost against life and actually just trying to kill myself. I see the way that I was taking, it was so reckless and so careless and just so destructive. And it took a lot to heal from, to realize that, and then to heal from that. And I'd still say, 6-7 years on, I'm still going through the process of, I'm definitely, I've done a lot of work, but I'd say there's still big elements of, I know that there's still elements of that I'm working on. But to put that into perspective, I went from being this guy that was, if I didn't have a corporate job, you would have just considered me to be a drug addict, and I wouldn't have known where I would have been buying my drugs from and all of this sort of stuff. I went from that to working with people in drug rehabilitation. So that's where I sort of see, that's what I learned, the value of, well, I could be that way and be destructive and pull other people down with me, or I could be this way and be a guiding light or a benefit to humanity. And that the choice is up to me, and I've got to do the work to do either. That both things require work. But what's going to be of more benefit and what makes life more pleasant to live is, from my own experience, is being more on this side of helping, rather than just taking and being destructive.
So listening to you now, I can sort of get a sense that there's been a real shift in your value system. So pre your challenge, one set of values, and then now it seems like they may have just morphed or changed. Are you able to articulate what you valued before and what you're now valuing now, and what those differences are?
I think it would have just come more around, my values before would have been more selfish. It would have just been more about what I wanted from life. In a sense of, if anybody got in my way or I didn't agree with something, it's almost like you could just burn that bridge. Or now I have just a lot more tolerance and a lot more compassion, I think is a good word to use. I would have had, I paint myself to be as like this bad person. I always had these qualities within myself, but the good and bad qualities, right? They're always within me. It's now that I'm just more aware and I can do more work to balance the types of qualities that I think are going to be more beneficial to humanity rather than myself. That makes sense. So,
I love that you say that, because one of the things that I teach with my clients is around our ability, and it's very much what you're saying, that we always have, we have every single quality within us at our core. At our core, we can be anything, anybody. And it all depends on what volume, how much volume we give or we want to activate on a certain trait or quality. So it sounds like you're, in a way, and please jump in and correct me if you think I'm paddling up the wrong stream, that you've sort of dialed down selfishness and dialed up selflessness.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
For sure. But I just see that the results that come are very different.
Mm-hmm.
The selflessness, it makes me feel better. You know what I mean? So I'm in a position now where, if you look at it from a financial perspective, I used to be very financially successful. I've not been in that industry for a long time. I'm now the complete opposite to that. And in a sense, almost struggling to get by, but a lot more happy within myself from what I do, even though going and teaching yoga and doing all these things, I invest a lot of time to that and the return is very small. But it's more rewarding than what I used to do. So, because, you know, you see the connection you get with people and can change people and you can make a difference in people's lives. And you can't put a price on that in terms of the way that it makes me feel.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I see that that's, but having said that, that doesn't negate the reality that we live in a financial world. And I'm actually at a point now where I've kind of come to the end of one point. I am actually looking to get back into doing other types of work, just purely from a financial perspective. Now that I've done what I feel like the work that I had to do in order to become a teacher, because that's a whole story in itself, because I used to be an extremely anxious person. And the idea of public speaking or any form of being in front of a camera or having to get up in front of people and say who I was, that used to be my biggest nightmare. So I had to spend a fair bit of time overcoming that. I've since become a public speaker and, you know, get up in front of people and teach all the time. So I kind of have got that skill now, but don't have that. So I'm trying to find that balance of financial stability and still wanting to teach and all of that sort of stuff. So that's why I say it's always a work in progress.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I've been on a journey, but not the same as you. I didn't have a massive challenge like you, but I did have, I'm going to call it an awakening, where I realized, hey, I've been living the life. I used to work in corporate in finance, 22 years, and similar thing. And I spent a lot of time, and it was one day I remember working. So I worked in Melbourne, walking down Collins Street to Docklands, to head office of the building that I worked in, and walking down the street, I saw all of these, I just looked around me and I saw all of these people like little ants all going to work together to this massive big like ant hill, which was the building. And I looked around and this little voice in my head said, if you're walking with the crowd, you're walking in the wrong direction. And I learned around going, I don't enjoy this. I mean, I enjoy it. I'm earning good money. I love the people I worked with. I was doing great work. I was using my skills, but I was not truly fulfilled. And so from that point on, I then decided I need to find a way out of here. So how can I do that? So similar journey, but I just didn't have a massive health challenge like you did, and I had a little mini awakening in here, and my life really changed because of that.
Well, it's an interesting thing, and I don't think how we come to the realizations that we come to is important. You know what I mean? Some people just need a little thing like what you're talking about, just a small shift in awareness. People like me that are incredibly stubborn need a big slap across the face from the universe to sometimes have those realizations. Because even with everything I've been through, the amount of times I've still tried to force myself back to my old ways. And I always look at it as we can live in a kind of direct line with life and kind of serve the purpose that we're here to serve. And things will run relatively smoothly. So if somebody's life is going, in a pretty linear direction and they're enjoying it, they don't need to change it. You know what I mean? But if you're kind of dipping out here and you're getting these signals of like, you know, the universe is giving you a little bit of a tap here and there. And I've had this so many times in my life, the more you ignore it, the more violent those kind of slaps become. And you get to the point where if you're so far off the course of what you should be doing in terms of living a valuable life, or just valuing your own existence. It's not that the universe is cruel and trying to punish you. It's actually always just trying to help you. And sometimes that it's the resistance that we kind of put up. So this is why I always say, if you have one of those really like just momentary experiences of realization and then you do something about it, that's always going to serve an individual well. It's when you have those realizations and you don't do something about it, that's when it causes problems. And I still know that now. Every time I realize something, and it's just sort of go, oh, I don't really want to realize that. You know, I don't really want to know that. Shit, now I know that I have to do something about it. And it sort of speaks volumes to also why there's so much instability in the world at the moment, because we're having realization en masse now because of the internet. We're on realization overload, humanity at the moment. And we're having so much realization in such a short period of time, we don't actually have the amount of time to sit and digest and process it and turn the right realization into actualization. And so everybody's just kind of like getting this pent up, and we don't have this kind of relief or mechanism to turn it into new direction and change. This is why I think, you know, things like yoga, meditation, they are actually fundamentally essential to help guide us through this period of time. We need it, and that's why it's the almost like the foundation for it's all there. We just haven't learned to really channel and use it properly quite yet, but it's kind of heading that way.
Yeah, I've noticed just recently, more so because of the pandemic and so forth, that a lot of people are starting to realize that some of these tools that you mentioned are quite valuable, especially workplaces reaching out to, I've got colleagues that are yoga instructors and so forth, and organizations reaching out to them saying, hey, we've just realized we've neglected the well-being of our people. So looking at, you know, creating wellbeing programs, introducing yoga into the workplace, and all those sort of things. Some have been doing it for a while, but I think it's just turned the volume up a little bit louder on it, realizing, hang on a minute, how can we support people across all aspects? So physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So
yeah, well, I think that's always going to be the hardest one, trying to get that, again, spiritual aspect, or I call it like subtle aspect of existence, into the framework of corporation. Once that happens, things will change quite significantly. See, I'm not against, I don't think that we should dismantle the structures of society. I think we should just improve on what we've got rather than try and tear it down. I think that everything's there. It all serves a good purpose and has value, and it's taken a long time to build it. We should just, you know, evolve it rather than try and just like tear it down. And I think once you kind of make that shift of getting people to just acknowledge that, and it's actually the easiest thing to do. You can do it very quickly if you've got the right, you know, the right way to kind of just sit people down, explain to them exactly why you're doing it, give them the experience. It can actually happen very quickly.
yeah, I agree. I agree. It's very much a lot of the work I do. So I agree wholeheartedly with you. I want to pan out again on something you said earlier in relation to some of the work you do now, where you said you went from using drugs to now helping people, you know, recover from drug addiction. What's that work involved? What are you doing in that space?
I was just, because my primary thing that I've been doing recently is kind of my book, public speaking and teaching yoga and meditation. And just one of the teaching jobs that I had was working with a private drug rehabilitation facility. So obviously with such a big drug problem globally now, especially in Australia, it's huge. The publicly funded systems are all strained, so that's created a market for private rehabilitation centres. And I was just working with one of them. The main thing that they work on is people coming off crystal meth, heroin, things like this. So not just like minor like drug. These people are generally up for incarceration, or they're, you know, got pending trials. And one of the things that people apply for is a change in circumstance, which means, and getting into a rehab program is one of those things that can kind of help you negate having to go to jail. So that's primarily the people I've been working with. And to put that into perspective, I could walk into that room some days, and I would just be working them on a once a week basis. And I could walk into that room and not know who's going to be there on that day. Sometimes there would be 3 or 4 people, sometimes there'd be 10. I walk in with my man bun and walking with guys, and they're looking at me like they want to kill me, like, what's this wanker with the man bun, going to tell us? Some of these guys could be only days off, coming off years worth of drug use. And so they're quite fragile nervous systems and quite fragile states. And I've been able to just sit down, and I always relate to their, them at their experience where they are at that time. So it's having that background with my experience in drugs and alcohol, always, you can come and relate to them. That's a big value. And I can, share a bit of my story, but then get them into some gentle, and I'm not teaching a yoga style, let's come on, get into this awkward shape. It's very much about moving and energy within the body, releasing tension, and getting into the subtle frameworks of energy. And I can do 20, 30 minutes with them of very, very basic stuff. And they walk out wanting to give me a hug and know more about the practice. And then they can't wait for the next week. So I've seen the value of it. And the whole reason I wrote my story was because I came from that position of, if somebody had told me all of this, there's no way I would have believed them. So I knew that when I was writing my book, and I kind of even knew it when I was going through the experiences that I was going through, ever from that healing session. The stuff that I went through was insane. Like the kind of experiences that I had that go beyond any kind of rational explanation. If I had been told that, I wouldn't have believed it. So I always knew that when I was writing my book. And I kind of wrote it as a case study, as in, hey, here's one example, but let's not just take my word for it. Can we go and find other people to apply these techniques to, and do we get similar results? Because if we do, we need to investigate this. Again, I come from a scientific background, so we need to explore this. We need to start getting real world proof. And I see the stuff that I've done in the drug rehabilitation as being other examples of that.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a lot of work being done just basically on what you're saying there. A lot of work being done out of, I don't know which university, but out in America, around how moving your body helps release PTSD symptoms. Which is, and they do recommend for a lot of trauma treatment, instead of going and seeing a psychologist and talking about your issue, it's actually, if you can move your body, and they highly recommend yoga as one of the ways to help move through any sort of traumatic event and so forth. And then if we look at the people that potentially you're working with, there may be some form of trauma in the background in their life that's led them to where they are to be using, drugs in the way that they do. I don't know, because everyone's individual, but there could be some form of trauma that actually leads them to that. So,
it generally does stem from trauma. And when you say trauma, we always think of that as being something quite significant, but trauma can be as little as something embarrassing happening to a 6-year-old child that they just take on, and they guard themselves for their whole life. And then that manifests into hundreds of different other stories. But exactly on what you're talking about, again, my story highlights a whole nother side of this as well. Exactly on what you're talking about, because having that shock of one day going to work, the next day being diagnosed with a brain tumor, and then all of a sudden 14-hour operation, intensive care. I also contracted meningitis. And while I was trying to get over the meningitis, I contracted swine flu and had all these complications, nearly died a few times. Was lucky to get out of hospital. So I was traumatized from that experience, and I got diagnosed with clinical depression, PTSD, got put on insane amounts of pharmaceutical medication, which was able to suppress those kind of horrible feelings of having those feelings of depression. But they just numbed me. And I spent like 6 months just on the couch like a vegetable. And within taking up the yoga and meditation, not only did it eradicate all of that kind of pent up fear and trauma from the operation and everything, it started to clear the stuff that was already there, that was the reason that I was doing drugs and alcohol in the first place. It's like I chipped away the first layer, and then I was like, oh, this is useful. I understand this about myself. So I went deeper and deeper and deeper, and I got back to, the roots of why I lived my life the way that I did. And I did it in a very short amount of time, 12, 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
Within 12 or 18 months, I understood the trajectory, and exactly what I was saying at the start, these little things, these little defining moments in my life that made me become more guarded towards the world and want to start protecting myself in a specific way. And I believe everybody's taking that to some extent. And we don't have the tools in Western culture to deal with those things. We're not taught them at a young age. And that's why we end up in a situation where people kind of get to their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, and then they don't know, they have no idea what's wrong with them, what they're doing, and then they'll beg somebody else to tell them what's wrong with them, and that'll always or usually come with a pharmaceutical solution, which will only, again, I'm not against those things because they can really help people in acute states and all that sort of stuff. I'm not anti-medication or anti Western medicine. But it can only take us so far. It can only, it's great for trauma, it's great for acute symptoms, but treating the underlying root causes, not very good.
Yeah. So I'd love to, and if you're willing to share, love to understand, because I think our listeners would probably benefit from some of the things that you uncovered through this work about some of the deeper causes from early on, because I think a lot of people go, oh yeah, whatever. You've had stuff happen to you. We all have. But sometimes people don't realize the subtleties of things that happen. And sometimes they are massive things that happen to us. And we go, oh yeah, it was because I was abused and sexually abused as a child. So yeah, I can see why I'm traumatized. And you mentioned before that sometimes there's even subtler things that you go, I thought I had a good childhood, but actually no, there was something. Are you willing to share some of the things that you uncovered that you noticed were part of the reason why you were using drugs while you were, living in the corporate life?
Yeah, 100%. The first 2 chapters of my book is all about this, what happens.
Oh, good. We don't have to read the book. We're going to hear it straight from you.
Yeah. It was due to a relationship with my father, was the root of what I was experiencing. Again, not to put him down, or the life that he provided for us growing up was, like, from a materialistic point of view, we were well cared for in that sense. We had a roof over our head, food on the table, went to good schools growing up. But there was always a disconnection between him and I. And he had this sense of, I do all this stuff for you kids and you don't appreciate it. But this, we're 5, 6, 7 years old, all this sort of things, and we're being told that we're ungrateful. And, this just went on from a young age for me. And, I was a very kind of active child and always getting up to mischief. I wasn't a bad kid, but I was always kind of like doing my own thing. And I was never one to kind of bow down to authority. I was always one to question things. So I was always questioning my father and kind of like, so that created a bit of a rift for us. But he was quite cruel to me emotionally in that sense. So when you talk about these things, like, yes, it's very easy to quantify kind of physical abuse from a young age, people that go through terrible things like that. That's very easy to kind of extrapolate that out and see that. But I actually think the emotional aspects of things that happen, they're the wounds that don't go treated, and I actually made this kind of correlation in my book. I said, if you get stabbed or you break a bone or something like this, you can look at it and you go, that's not right. I need to go to the hospital. They'll have a protocol in place to have a physical fix for that. They'll stitch you up or reset the bone and send you on your way. The problem with emotional and mental trauma is it's not seen. So, and we're still just coming out of the phase of existence for humanity where most of it's kind of been like, you've got nothing to complain about, just get on with it, do what you're told, sort of thing. Like, what have you got to complain about? And that was, again, very much like the mentality of my father, like, you don't know how good you've got it, you should just kind of live the life that I'm giving you. So that creates that sort of fragmented part of our existence of, from a young age, you're already told that you're not doing things properly, or So you kind of like live your life trying to, well, I did anyway. I lived my life trying to avoid that. And if you look at the insanity of it, my dad was a really successful financial banker into the finance world, and big drinker, big into gambling, all these sort of things. So I always had this mentality like, oh, I won't end up anything like him. And that was one of the reasons I ran off to the other side of the world, because I just wanted to get as far away as I possibly could from him. But then I end up working in, like, okay, I got into IT and all of this sort of stuff, but I'm working in an investment bank, you know, like it's just, and that was all part of my big realization as well, how much like growing up around that and developing, I would almost call it a pure hatred for my father, like this kind of deep underlying hatred for him. And that was like the root of all of the kind of, if you kind of extrapolate like the way that we work out, you know, it's like those layers of abstraction. You know, at the root, this is like my programming, at the root of my programming, this is kind of like something that's fundamentally broken within me, and something that I didn't want to address or even look at, you know what I mean? So I would just spend, that's why I kept myself so busy and just so crazy, because the crazier that I was doing, the less I would have to think or, you know, experience like that fundamental thing within me. And when I started to realize all of that and kind of break it down, I actually I remember the day I was in London, I was just kind of going through my processes and things. I just got to this realization of just like, oh yeah, like he didn't really do that because of me. Like he just did that because he's got that thing broken within himself. And that's how he's manifesting that. And he's just never been given the tools to address that and fix that. And then the moment I realized that, I went, oh, I better be nicer to him, sort of thing. Like I just instantly felt compassion to him, because I then saw how that, like that broken thing within me, what that did to me within my life, and how grateful I was that I was sort of put on a path to be able to fix that. But then knowing that he's gone like an extra 30, 40 years of his life not being able to fix that, how incredibly sad that was. And ever since, like that, I then thought I'd be able to go through, oh, I can help him, but it doesn't work. It's not as simple as that. I even went back and tried to live with him after but it just, you know, it doesn't work this simple way. Like he may never have those realizations in this lifetime. And I also learned that that's cool too, you know, like that doesn't mean that I have to be impacted by that pain anymore. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more depth to it, but that's kind of trying to wrap it up and baseline it. But that's definitely, I mean, there was other things in life that happened, but they still all stem from that lack of trust, you know, very much then when people, you know, like friends do things that kind of hurt you or break the trust in or relationships. And again, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I did that to other people too. But you know what I mean? Those things add up and add up and add up, but they all have that same sort of root. You know, they're all those same sort of very basic roots. And once I kind of gave that, like that compassion to my father, it actually just rippled on to everything else. I got no hang-ups about anybody in my life, people that I would have could have potentially held grudges against until the day that I die. It's just, I don't even, it's you know what I mean? It's just not even there anymore. And that's freeing, you know, it's to be free of having any gripes or hang-ups on things. And even letting go of things that were like, that I never thought I would have been able to let go of, you know, just
give us some examples of those things that you thought you'd never be able to let go of.
Well, I got one big one, and it's pretty full on, probably in the depths of my insanity when I was using a lot of drugs, probably, you know, heavy drug and alcohol use about 4 or 5 nights a week. But in the corporate world, like, so it wasn't like I was sitting at home and getting high. It was just, you're in London, you can go out any night of the week and nobody bats an eyelid. It's part of the culture. Yeah, so I'm just like 4 or 5 nights a week out, and I think you always meet the people. You always, law of attraction, right? You always meet the people that you that are kind of like you as you're going through things, or the ones that will show you certain things. And I ended up getting in this relationship with a girl, and she was like this the feminine version of me, and we had this crazy relationship that I've always had that sense of like caring. I've always cared about people. I've always had that sense of compassion within me and really valued friendships and relationships and things like this. And I cared about this girl immensely, and I was really hung up on her. But yeah, there was some things that happened in that relationship that really affected me and really hurt me. And we ended up one night in a pretty crazy situation and had a physical altercation, and ended up, it's in my book, I don't want to go too much into it, but it ended up, I got arrested for it and all this sort of stuff. I was the one who ended up, because the police will always side with the woman. I don't know, like that was the way that it seemed to me. Like I felt like I didn't even have a chance of getting my thing across because they took her side of the story, which was absolutely fabricated. And I ended up going to court and all that, and the truth ended up coming out, and I was cleared of everything and all that. But it was a long process, and I was livid about that. You know, I was absolutely livid about it, because not just the how much it broke my heart, but just the sense of injustice with like everything that spilled on from that. And it messed with me for a long time. Like I thought about it a lot, and it definitely had a huge impact of how my life played out after that, and all those sorts of things. But again, and I never thought I would have even been able to speak to that girl again. And again, after this kind of I was happy to talk to her and say, hey, like, you know, let's talk about it. Let's resolve it, and have no hard feelings towards anything like that again. So that's probably like one of the more extreme examples of going through something like that. But yeah, I'd much rather be in the position of having let that go than still hanging on to it. And because I can see how easy it would be to kind of have that in the background and see how much that would influence any future relationship and all those. If I keep that hang up, that means, you know, in the next relationship I meet, and as soon as something feels a little bit off, then you have that defense mechanism. You don't take things for how they actually are. You're taking them for how you're hung up on the past, rather than just treating something for how it actually is. So again, there's so much benefit in being able to really heal the wounds, not only within yourself. If you then can go in and make amends and heal it in the other person, knock-on effect is huge. And you're changing like the karmic aspect of reality, then it's very beneficial for the balance of the universe without getting too woo-woo. Don't want to go too down.
You're not getting woo-woo to me, but some of our listeners might go, what are you talking about? What are you guys smoking on this episode? But yeah, I love what you're saying there around, you know, this ability for us to let things go. So being on a similar journey where I've had a lot of stuff happen to me in my life and I don't carry any of it with me. So I imagine if I was, I'd be walking around now with a metaphorical backpack on my back full of heavy weights, and it just makes life hard to move through with all of these things. So, you know, in your case, if you're still carrying all those stones and rocks from everything your father had ever said to you, and every resentment around that girlfriend and all the things that you've done, if they were in a backpack on your back, and they'd really weigh you down. So how can you live a fulfilled life and really embrace, you know, being human? So I really resonate with what you're saying there. And I think it's a beautiful lesson for us all, but it's not easy for everyone to understand how to let those things go, because we think sometimes that, well, I believe this, if we letting it go and moving forward, we're actually condoning sometimes what the other person did. In some instances, and that comes,
it's the hardest thing to kind of acceptance of the situation is probably the hardest thing.
And I think it comes with, and you've mentioned this as well, is the levels of, you know, your level of awareness. As your awareness grows and you have the ability to see things from other perspectives, like you viewed your father through compassion. That's a different lens than how you used to view him. And everything is so different. You can only do that through self-awareness. You need to be aware that you could have the ability to flip your lenses And some people don't know how to do that. So it's a really beautiful story that you have there, and I'm hoping our listeners can see a little bit of themselves in your experiences and see that, you know, we can move forward. And one of the things that we mentioned in your bio was that, you know, I'm just going to read it out here. So now you're teaching how yoga and meditation play a key part in self-transformation and optimizing human potential. Can you just share, and we're going to finish up, can you just share what you believe optimizing human potential is for you? What does that mean?
Well, it spills on directly what you're talking about there with awareness. If you're not really aware of what you're fully capable of, how can you extract it from yourself? So people that don't, and that's the three parts. When we talk about yoga, we're talking about three aspects of existence. And you can fundamentally say that's the mind, that's the body, and the container of that, which is the awareness. So you can sit down and go, I've got a mind, I've got thoughts, I've got physical sensations in my body, but they're all contained in the same space of awareness. So that's what you're trying to do with yoga, is to just bring that into a more harmonized state. And as soon as because people live either very mental lives, very much just in their own thoughts, and that's the way that they project and view life to be, or you have people that live very physically, and then you'll have people that live very spiritually, and it's not beneficial to live spiritually and not have the balance of, you know, all these things are very fine balancing act. And once you tap into the state of awareness, you start to open so much more up in terms of just what's accessible to us in the experience of life through, because that's the thing, intellectualizing things and having knowledge without having that learned wisdom of experience it's not the most valuable thing that we have. Experience and self-understanding is so valuable, because then once you have that, you understand really what you're capable of. So from my own perspective, I went from being in my literal deathbed to being in a wheelchair to learning how to walk again. And I did that in about 6 months. But then 6 months after I took up the practice of Kundalini yoga and meditation, 6 months only after having learned to walk again, I ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. So if you don't see that as extracting more potential out of myself, I mean, I was always a person that would have had ability to do something like that, but I doubt I ever would have done it without having that awareness of, and that knowing and that trust within myself to know, hey, I can actually do this, you know, and that's where I see the potential. So through awareness, you actually do see more of your potential. What is the realistic state of your potential, and can you actually go and live that? I'm not saying it's some magic quick fix, like sit down, hold this posture and breathe this way and you're going to go and solve the world's problems. More of the sense of, no, you'll probably uncover something about yourself that will require a little bit more work. You know, through that process, you'll then learn how to adapt that to other situations that come up against you in life. And we don't live in an easy world. This is a hard life to navigate. But if you've got more tools in your arsenal, like the more awareness you have about how the world works, the easier it is to navigate. And if we live in this kind of narrow view of, I know how the world is, I think this way, other people should think this way too, it's going to cause problems for you. Because as soon as you come against somebody that thinks differently to you, you've got a problem. You know what I mean? And if you don't have that fundamental understanding of, oh, that person's living their way because they've had those experiences and they're very different to mine, but the fundamental essence of who we are, we're both just trying to do the same thing, and that's just live our lives. The moment that you can start to tap into that aspect of your existence is the moment that life starts to get easier. And not in the sense of everything's just going to start happening for you. There'll just be less resistance and less friction against yourself. Once you have less friction against yourself, you just stop having less friction with other people.
Absolutely.
So that's where the potential of being human really lies, in just self-understanding. And it seems so simple, because it actually is. And it doesn't take anything more than just spending a bit of time each day to sit down and turn awareness inwards. And it doesn't have to be any sort of special technique or anything. You can just do it right now. You can sit down, close your eyes, and just watch. Like I was saying, that energy healer told me, just sit back and watch. Just watch what's happening within your framework of existence and just chill out. You know, just watch it for a moment and just see how that makes you feel. And if watching your thoughts makes you feel uncomfortable, you got work to do. You know what I mean? If you can't just sit down and close your eyes, I know we're wrapping up, but I always liken it to this kind of analogy. How easy is it for people to sit down and watch hours of Netflix? How much human potential gets wasted through YouTube and Netflix alone, for example? But you tell somebody to go and sit down and shut their eyes, they can't do it for 5 minutes. And this is the most incredible piece of machinery known to man. And you can't sit down and just close your eyes and appreciate it for 5 minutes before it makes you feel uncomfortable. I'd question why that is.
Mm. And that's a beautiful question for people to ponder, I think. I do have a final sort of question for you. If you think about what you've experienced to date, and I know there's more wisdom ahead of you, but from what you've experienced, would there be any, and I use this term lightly, advice or recommendations, and it might even just carry on from what you've just said now, to our listeners that you would recommend that they might just start doing something quite simple so that they may be able to start to tap into some of that human potential?
Yeah, it'll always be dependent on the individual. Start with what you can start with. That's logic, and realistic, logical and realistic. Because I've had to learn this myself recently as a teacher, because I come from a very extreme background, or extreme sports as a kid. I'm not the sort of guy that just goes and runs a marathon or anything like that, or goes for a 5K. I want to run, 7 marathon or a 100K race, or all these sorts of things.
You don't do things by halves.
No, so when I started teaching, I kind of taught that way. Like, you've got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning like me, take a cold shower, sit on the mat for 3 hours. No. If it's 10 minutes to find your starting point, because it'll evolve from there. So you're going to create more of a resistance in people that are doing nothing and trying to make them do 3 hours. So start with the 10 minutes. And again, I would never give a recommendation of even anything like, go and do Kundalini yoga, go and do because that's what's worked for me. But I know for a fact it doesn't work for everyone. And that's why we have all these different modalities, whether it's energy healing, whether it's yoga, whether it's this meditation or that meditation. There's a vast spectrum of that because everybody's so different. But it's important to go and find the things that have some sort of resonance, like you might try a few different things. Oh, that's not for me. Then don't feel like you're doing something wrong because somebody's recommended something to you. You know how you get all these people, then they have good intent. Oh, you've got to go and try XYZ because it's the best thing I've ever done. You should do it too. And then you go and try and you're like, what's wrong with me? I didn't really get too much from that. So if you get that, you just sort of go, all right, that didn't work for me. I'll wait till see and then when something clicks, then explore it. But also find the balance between that. You don't want to be spending your whole life one thing to the next. There's a lot of value in finding something and then seeing it through for a long period of time. Because I think that's a huge thing that we've lost in humanity now. We've forgotten that to create change and to make things happen, it requires time, effort, discipline, all these sorts of things. Because we live this fixed, quick culture with our phones. And if we want an answer to something, our brains are getting wired to like, oh, there's the answer, there's the answer. And it's actually stopped us to remember that, oh, shit, like we're meant to dedicate our lives to something. Like I see now that that's what I'm going to dedicate. I want to make a difference in mental health and addiction. And I tried. And when I did my first few years, I was like, oh, this is really hard. And I could have seen how I could quite easily give up. But I'm like, oh no, well, if this takes me another 30, 40 years and I only make a small dent in it, then I've done good. Rather than going, oh, well, that's too hard. Maybe I'll go and try and find something that's easier to do. And then, oh, shit, that's even hard. Oh, the next thing. So it's about finding that balance. Don't just keep skipping from one thing to the next. Find something and try to find that balance between it being, what's comfortable and what's too much discomfort. Just find a little area where it takes you a bit out of your comfort zone, but not maybe too far that, you'll do it for 2 weeks and then never want to see it again. So a balance, like always find that balance with what you're doing and just stay true to like a certain trajectory and realize that things like no matter what path you take, you're going to get knocked off it at points. And that's actually the exciting time because that's when you really show if you're dedicated to something.
And that's where you
So,
get to use the tools that you've developed and put in your
yeah,
toolbox the whole
that's it.
time. Like, they're nice to have them, but if you never use them, right?
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that. And I've actually had a realization of that myself recently. I've done all these thousands of hours of meditation and all of this. And I went and did this 10-day silent meditation retreat recently. And the big thing that, how you come away with from those things with big, like, oh, I didn't know that before. Mine was like, I've done so much work that I haven't applied enough of it to real life experience. I have applied some, but I need to do more. I need to do actually less of that stuff, like less meditation, less yoga, and I need to do more action in the world. And that's what I got from that. And I've actually been transitioning from that over the last 6 months. So just less time of kind of dedicating to my own, because I've kind of healed myself. Like, I could do so much more healing on myself, but I think I'll get more healing on myself by helping, like by taking what I've learned already and going and helping others, because I'll learn more through that. Now I've learned enough about myself that I'm confident enough to go out and do that with other people now. And I have to actually learn how to apply that now. And that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, beautiful. I'd see a metaphor came to me of, the universe has handed you this toolbox of all these amazing tools, and you're sitting there on them, and all you're doing is playing in the backyard. You're not building stuff. You're not building shit with your tools. Go out there and build stuff now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a perfect way to summarize it.
Yeah.
It really is.
You're just sitting there looking at your tools and keeping them all to yourself. Now go out there, build a school, build something with the tools that you have, right? So I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for you then as this all unfolds. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you. So if people would like to get a hold of you, get hold of your book, follow you on social media, how do they do that?
Everything I've got at the moment is branded under the title of my book, which is Kundalini Running. So all my socials and website for the book is just all self through that brand. I'm actually going through a branding and marketing thing at the moment. I'm going to have just a dougwilson.com.au branded website, probably mid-June-ish. And I've also got a YouTube channel that I've just started for that exact thing. I'm trying to share the tools through the YouTube channel now. And that channel's the science and yoga of meditation.
Yeah, beautiful.
So hopefully I'll get it all. It's a bit dispersed at the moment, but I'm hopefully going to try and just get it all into that dougwilson .com brand. Otherwise, at the moment, just look at the Kundalini running stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I highly recommend people do that. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you. And I'm absolutely certain that our listeners will be taking away some nuggets from from your journey and some of your wisdom, because wisdom is things where, you've applied some of these techniques in your life and got some results. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.
Curious and curious.